examples. I'm going to bring in letters from actual inmates that are redacted and de-identified, but I think will really help illustrate some of these points. If you're in correction, if you're a practitioner, you probably do, every time you make a progress note or a contact note, a mental status exam. And there's a couple pieces in there that are really important and I think get overlooked. So I really want to hit that and talk about what some of those terms are and how they can be very useful for us in a way that you might not have thought about before. And last, have fun. I don't know if that's a legitimate objective, but I hope this is fun. It's a serious topic, but I hope we can enjoy each other just talking about it, whatever the word is. I'm going to talk to you about legal stuff because Lord knows I've spent plenty of time in court and responding to lawyers. I'm going to talk to you about when I document and when I'm thinking through what I got to do, how I think that might play out in court. But please just understand, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not giving you legal advice. I'm talking to you as a psychologist who's been dragged into court and made to look like a fool many times. And I hope that you can learn from my experiences. I've worked with all kinds of prisoners, maximum security, minimum security, segregation, mental health units, the whole gamut. And I think I can bring some of my experiences to bear in a way that if you're in practice out there, you'll relate to. And if you're in academics or something else, I hope you'll find it interesting, or maybe you'll have something to correct me on. I'll use some real life examples. That's going to consist mostly of letters. I have redacted and de-identified them. I just like to pull a little section of the code of ethics out to show that I'm trying to, I don't really love the idea of pulling some of my clients' written materials in here, but I think it's really, really valuable educationally. And so I'm doing this in the most ethical way I can. This is an example. This is a photo I took in a prison in Pendleton, Indiana, in the maximum security mental health unit. And I had just been running a group. And after the group, we had to sit there for a couple minutes for count. And we're just kind of killing a few minutes. And one inmate just got up, grabbed a blue dry erase marker. And in the course of about 6 minutes, while he and I were talking about something, he just cranked this thing out. If you can't tell, that's supposed to be me in the pink shirt. Although I'm noting it's not pink, it's salmon. And I'm telling him to write me a Dear Man, which if you're familiar with DBT is, anyway, it's a thing. I just use this to illustrate what I suspect a lot of you out there have run into, which is the prisoners will communicate with us sometimes in letters and pictures and writings. And these things are interesting, but they can also be super interesting as far as diagnostic understanding. So this is going to be kind of the heart of the matter. If you've ever worked in prison before, imagine this. You're sitting there at your office or your desk or your cubicle, whatever you got, and you're minding your business, doing whatever you're doing, and a phone rings, and some correctional officer over in the SEG unit calls and says, hey, someone over here needs to be seen by mental health. Okay, here we go, trot, going, running across the yard or the flag or whatever you call it, and you go over there to SEG, and here's some guy. Now, I've always worked in male units. I know plenty of you work in female facilities, but I'll say he a lot just because that's my background. Some guy sitting there and he's staring at you. You pull him aside, you have a little conversation, and he says, look, they're trying to move me to this dorm I don't want to go to. And I'm hearing voices, and those voices are telling me to hurt people. So you need to get them to stop that move because I like where I'm at. And if you let them move me, bad stuff's going to happen and the blood will be on your hands because I'm going to tell them all that I told Campbell I was hearing voices and he didn't do anything. All right. If you work in prison, I suspect you've been in that situation before, right? You got a decision to make. Am I going to intervene in this housing decision or am I going to let it happen? Now, that is anxiety provoking for a lot of people in the mental health field because a person who says that, are they likely to go out and actually hurt somebody? Well, a lot of times, yeah. Is it because they're psychotic? Suddenly we got a question, don't we? If they're psychotic, we need to stop the move, intervene, do something. If they're not, maybe we need to say, well, it feels very risky. You are suddenly thrown into a very high risk situation with very little information. Now, I've done this before and people said, well, let's refer them for a full psychiatric workup. And I'm like, well, yeah, but in the real world, we're making these decisions fast. If you get the reputation of the guy who sends everybody to the mental health unit, who says your voices, you're going to get loaded with people all saying that. So what do you do? And not only what do you do, but how do you document your decision in a way that will protect you if things go bad? Because that's a reality we all live with all the time. In fact, do me a favor. If you're out there and you work in prison, just put in the chat or something. Have you ever faced this situation before? Have you ever talked to another clinician who comes asking for advice or seeking consultation? Have you faced this before? Now, I suspect most of us have. Here's a little quote from an article. This is about diagnosis, differential diagnosis. We witness the epidemic-like explosion of certain diagnoses. In this case, he's referring to autism, attention deficit. Such dramatic increases may be due to an actual and true rise in the incidence, changes in treatment-seeking behavior, or availability of novel and more efficacious treatments. However, common clinical experience suggests that quite often, such popularities emerge because physicians become unduly impressed by new circulated checklists targeting specific disorders, while failing to perform a comprehensive diagnostic assessment, or, catch this one, because the physician is unaware or simply ignore the diagnostic rules. Now, how many people have faced, every day, all the time, yes, heard it before many times, thank you for those comments. How many people out there who work in prison have people on your caseload who are carrying a diagnosis of schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder because some provider in the community slapped that down, probably because the person was in some kind of substance-induced state or something like that. But now they're carrying a very serious mental health diagnosis on their chart, and suddenly they're under the criteria for serious mental disorder, maybe special housing, maybe they can't go to SEG, all those things. So that's the reality we deal with. And we want to be able to be good diagnosticians. We want to be able to diagnose what the actual problem is. And so I'm going to give you my 4 main tools that we will then discuss for differentiating a psychotic episode or a psychotic disorder with a personality disorder. The first thing I want you to remember is we're going to talk about an individual's thought content versus a person's thought process. I see tons of documentation that says this person's delusional or this person's hearing voices, but it says nothing about the content. It's only addressing the content. It says nothing about the process. I want you to pay attention to this. 2, when you do that mental status exam, you are probably checking a box whether they are showing judgment and whether they are showing insight. We're going to talk about what those mean and why they're so important in this differential diagnosis piece. 3rd, we're going to talk about what it means when we talk about the organization of someone's thoughts and behavior. I used to get calls all the time, and people would say, I need to send a person to your mental health unit. He's psychotic. I'd say, oh my gosh, what's going on? They say, he's totally disorganized. Like what? What are you seeing? Well, he's really violent. Okay, so he's disorganized. He's very violent. He's disorganized. Now, hold on. Being violent may be disorganization, but it may be extremely organized. It's bad, we don't want it, but it doesn't mean it's disorganized. And that's an important component of your diagnosis of a psychotic episode. And then lastly, we're also going to talk about what it really means to be functionally impaired and how that's an important part of differential diagnosis. A couple quick notes. This is a brief presentation. We're not going to talk about medication-induced psychosis. We're not going to talk about substance-induced psychosis. I know you deal with that. We're not going to talk about like the benign psychosis, sleep deprivation, caffeine, stuff like that. And we are not going to talk about malingering. Gang, don't diagnose people with malingering. That is a pro tip from me. Yes, it's a DSM diagnosis. I know it's in here. Don't do it because you are putting yourself in very precarious legal situation as soon as you diagnose malingering. I just say avoid it. That's my personal opinion. Okay, now.
Dr. Campbell, this is Danielle.
Yep, sure.
Just a quick question. People are interested in your slides, and for note-taking purposes, will you be providing copy?
Yeah.
Maybe a revised copy. No, not right now, but later,
okay.
sending them to me.
Yeah. I'll send you
Okay.
the slides if you want them. Now,
Awesome.
the one thing I'll say is this, gang. I use real inmate letters, and they're redacted, but I don't like the letters actually floating around. So the letters will not be part of the slides. If you want the slides for information, I'm more than happy to share. I just don't feel comfortable sharing the actual inmate letters. You'll see them in a little bit. I do just like to not include those. So I hope you understand where I'm coming from. Okay. Now, there's plenty of psychotic disorders. It's not all schizophrenia, but let's use schizophrenia as our main our main thing. This is taken from the DSM, the diagnostic criteria of schizophrenia. And here's the thing, we often read this, but we don't really stop and think about what it means. So let's just break this down in just the course of a minute or two. Per the DSM-5, schizophrenia, a diagnosis of schizophrenia requires the presence of at least 2 of the following 5 symptoms. Now remember, for at least a month. For at least 1 month. So right away, what I want you thinking is when that guy calls you down to the dorm and says, you can't move me because I'm hearing voices, you don't got a diagnosis of schizophrenia right off the bat because you don't got a month. But let's keep looking because it goes deeper. So we got to see delusions, which are fixed beliefs that don't correspond to reality. We got to see hallucinations. That's, if you're not familiar, hallucinations mean there's no sensation, but it's the 5 senses. They're seeing, smelling, tasting, hearing, or feeling something in the absence of any stimulus. 3, disorganized speech. Now I'm going to drop an F-bomb here just because I hear it all the time. Someone's like, fuck you, Campbell, that's bullshit. I've heard people say that's disorganized. That's not disorganized. That dude's communicating very clearly with me that he doesn't like what I just did. It's organized. It's maybe antisocial, but it's not disorganized. Don't let people confuse aggressive, disruptive behavior with disorganized behavior. Sorry about the F-bomb. I've got terrible habits after years in maximum security prison. Not only is the speech going to be disorganized, but the behavior should be either disorganized or catatonic. I very rarely see the catatonic stuff. That's like not moving at all. But the disorganized stuff, again, disruptive behavior is not the same as disorganized. And then lastly, the negative symptoms, the flatness, the lack of affect, the lack of emotion, the lack of speech. Now, here's what I want to stop and break down with you. The guy that we just dealt with gave us 1 symptom. He said hallucinations. That's not enough for schizophrenia. Don't let the people you're supervising slap a schizophrenia diagnosis on that guy, because right away, you're going to see people who say, oh my gosh, he's hearing voices, schizophrenia. Not yet. We don't got the time frame and we don't got enough symptoms. So it's a little thing. It might be a picky thing, but it's an important thing. Be sure you are remembering that and the people you supervise are remembering that. And then lastly, the psychotic episode has to represent a decrease in functioning. In other words, that person, we need to have evidence that that person was functioning pretty well, but it says they had a psychotic episode. All of a sudden, their behavior changed dramatically, and now they're not taking care of themselves. They're not eating right. They're not wrecking. They're not getting out of bed, whatever it may be. They're not taking care of their hygiene. If this guy who's reporting us, he's going to hurt somebody, if this is his norm, right away, we've ruled out schizophrenia. You don't got a diagnosis of schizophrenia. But in my experience, a lot of people will hear that person say, I'm hearing voices, and slap that diagnosis of schizophrenia on the chart, and then it's there forever, right? So we want to be sharp. Now, we could break this down, but we're going to keep moving because time's short. Let's compare that to our personality disorder. And what I did is just pull up the general criteria, not of any one specific personality disorder, but just to compare. Look at what we got here. A personality disorder is an enduring pattern of experience. It deviates from expectations. It is inflexible. It is pervasive. It is stable. It is of long duration. When you have somebody who's disruptive, violent, aggressive, even if they're telling you they hear voices. Now they may, and this may be a situation of psychosis, but you need to be checking that personality disorder criteria, because if this is the level they live on and you have had a chance to have a behavioral observation for a long period of time, remember the way they describe schizophrenia is we're often going to see episodes. When they have a psychotic episode, their functioning goes down, but then we expect if we can get them medicated and get them back, it goes back up. Personality disorder stays down here. That's their norm, right? Furthermore, especially take the board, we're really going to be in the cluster B of the personality disorders. When you look at something like borderline personality disorder, you'll see symptoms that look like psychosis. This idea of imaginary, they're having these frantic efforts to avoid imagined abandonment, a distorted sense of self, often a distorted sense of others, feeling of dissociation. Just because somebody's reporting odd, bizarre, perceptual abnormalities does not mean you want to slap that schizophrenia diagnosis on them. That's very indicative of personality disorder, especially when we're in that cluster B area. Now, here's something else I want to say. When you think about the schizophrenia criteria, really, they are all assessed by the clinician, except for hallucinations. Nobody comes to you and says, hey, doc, I'm having trouble with delusions. I believe things that aren't true, right? Nobody says that because they think it's true. Nobody comes and tells you, my speech is really disorganized. It doesn't make any sense, because they think it makes sense, right? Only hallucinations are self-reported. The DSM talks about this in terms of insight. Insight, which we'll talk a little bit about more in a moment, is that quality of understanding you have a mental illness. So when somebody comes to you and says, I'm depressed, what they mean is, I don't like how I feel. I want you to help me not feel this way. I want to feel good. I feel bad. This feels wrong. That's what Freud would have, or whoever would have called ego dystonic. It feels wrong. Most of the symptoms of schizophrenia are ego syntonic. They feel right to the person. And it's the clinician's job to say, that's disorganized. That doesn't make any sense. But the person themselves are rarely going to be able to articulate, I have a problem, because they lack insight. So the very fact a person saying, I have hallucinations and I'm going to go hurt somebody, it's going to be your fault, shows that person has good insight. Now, they may be lying, but their insight's not impaired because they understand that's a mental disorder. There's a little quote at the bottom of the slide from the DSM. In short, the presence of a consistent, some individuals' psychosis may lack insight or awareness of their disorder. Unawareness of illness is typically a symptom of schizophrenia rather than a coping strategy. In other words, that lack of insight, as soon as someone tells you they're hearing voices, like they may be, it doesn't mean you rule it, it's gone, but you be careful because that person's showing good insight. Second, here's just a quote from an article. The presence of consistent and marked immaturity of all object relations, generally in terms of object, the people they're relating to, emotional immaturity in general, outside of bona fide episodes of manic, hypomanic, or depressive, is characteristic of borderline personality disorder. When all the problems persist beyond an episode, you're probably dealing with a personality disorder, and you can very well justify that in your documentation. I don't know if that makes sense. I hope it does. We can't talk, so I'm just looking at a picture of myself in the slide, so I can't tell if you're nodding or looking blankly. All right, the thought content versus the thought process. The content is what the person describes. It's what they report. The process is how the clinician assesses not what they're saying, but how they're saying it. Are their comments logical and presented in an organized fashion? Do they stray quickly? Are their thoughts linked together? Now, way too often, I suspect you see this as well. The documentation says they're hearing voices or whatever, but it doesn't talk about how well their thoughts are stringing together. When we look at the letters, I want you to really remember this slide, that we're not just talking about what someone tells us, we're talking about how they tell us. Remember that. This will be a real key as we move on. Judgment means, does a normal person understand what you should do in a given situation? Now, it was common in the old days that if you checked yourself into a psychiatric hospital, they would ask you, hey, if you're walking down the street and you saw a sealed, addressed, stamped letter laying on the ground next to a mailbox, what would you do? And what they want you to say is, I'd pick it up and put it in the mailbox. Somebody probably just dropped it. In other words, I can recognize the situation. I know what to do. Now, if they say, I would pick up that letter and I would put it inside a fish, you'd say, uh-oh, we've got a problem with judgment. This person doesn't understand what to do. Think about the guy who just talked to us about hearing voices and doesn't want to go to the dorm. Is it linear? Is it organized? Absolutely. He knows who to get hold of, me. He knows what to tell me. I'm experiencing mental disorder symptoms. He knows the result of me believing him. He won't go to the dorm. The content is, I'm hearing voices. but the process is very organized and linear. That speaks against a psychotic disorder diagnosis. Secondly, he knows how to get me. He knows what to do. It may be antisocial judgment, but his judgment is not impaired by psychosis. Does that make sense? I don't know. I can't see you. I hope it makes sense. Psychosis means their judgment is impaired because they will suggest weird, bizarre things to do. An antisocial person will speak in a very linear term. It's not that their judgment is impaired by psychosis. It's impaired by antisocial attitudes and behaviors, but it follows. I'm going to hurt somebody. I'll get moved out of the dorm. I get to go to the way I want. It's antisocial, but it's organized. Does that make sense? Insight. We talked about insight being a person's ability to recognize their own mental disorder. Now, I just pulled a quote from David Sedaris just because I thought it was humorous. David Sedaris says, "That's something I really can't stand when people refer to themselves as crazy. The truly crazy are labeled so on the grounds that they see nothing wrong with their behavior. They forge ahead, lighting fires in public buildings and defecating in frying pans without the slightest notion they're out of step with the rest of society." Now that, to me, he says, is crazy. And that's just a humorous illustration to say the whole thing about a truly psychotic person is they don't understand that what they're doing is bizarre and eccentric. It makes sense in their internal world, but their internal world can't connect to the real world. The person who tells you, "I'm going to go kick some ass because I want to get moved out of the dorm," is actually showing pretty good insight. Now, they may be unaware of their antisocial qualities because that's the egosyntonic piece, but it's not at all the same flavor of a psychotic disorder. Lastly, this quality of organization. Remember, the violent person is not necessarily disorganized. The ICD-10, which if you're not familiar with, is kind of a medical, companion or whatever to the DSM, talks about schizophrenia as a retreat from reality in which a person has trouble telling the difference between real and unreal, having trouble thinking logically, having trouble having normal emotional responses to others and behaving normally. The diagnosis of schizophrenia requires an impairment in one of the major areas of functioning for a significant period of time, again, since the onset of the disturbance. If this person lives at that level of functioning, it's unlikely you're dealing with a psychotic episode. What you're dealing with is more likely looking like a personality disorder. This is the same thing. Don't diagnose malingering. This is just me having been in court many times. When you diagnose malingering, you are saying, "I know rock solid, this person is faking." That is very hard to prove. It's better just to avoid diagnosing psychosis if it's not there than to put malingering. Because now once you got malingering on the chart, you may have a fight on your hands. I've talked to plenty of lawyers about this. This is from me to you. Don't do it. Don't put it on the chart. Lastly, your subjective reaction, your feeling. And when we get to these letters, I think you'll get a feeling. In the research literature, they talk about the Praecox feeling, a classical concept referring to the characteristic feeling of unease or bizarreness experienced by a psychiatrist while interviewing a person with schizophrenia. I've got a little illustration, but we are at 5:30. I want to keep moving because I want to focus more on these letters. I'll tell you a quick one. I got called to a nurse's office. She said, "Please talk to this guy." And he said, look, it's just some guy sitting there. And he says, "What do you call it when you feel like there's an ear under your tongue?" And I said, "I'm sorry, what?" He said, "What do you call it when you feel like there's an ear under your tongue?" I said, "What?" I look at the nurse like, "Why am I here? I'm a psychologist. I don't know, like a polyp, a tumor. I don't know. What are you talking? I don't even know what you're talking about." He goes, "I feel like there's an ear under my tongue and it's got that, it sizzles. What do you call it?" And I say, "What? Huh? What? I'm sorry. I'm trying to follow you. What?" And he says, "It tastes international." It tastes international? And all of a sudden I go, oh, because what did I just realize? I realized he's crazy, right? It doesn't make any sense. But I want to tell you that story again and watch me. There's an ear under my tongue. I say, "Huh? It sizzles." What? That doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, what? It tastes international. Look at my body language. I find myself leaning forward. I squint because what am I doing? I am straining to make sense of what's happening. Do you see that? I lean forward, I squint, and I strain. What am I dealing with? I don't get it until I say, oh, I'm trying to make sense of something that's not going to make sense. Compare that to the guy who's sitting back in his chair and he says, hey, Campbell, hey, come here, Campbell. I hear voices, and if they move me to that dorm, it's on, and it's your fault. I don't have any experience of straining because I know exactly what he means, right? He's very organized. Now, we're going to look at some letters that I think will illustrate this purpose. I hope you can see these. If you can't, just tell me and I'll not be able to do anything about it. So I used to I've worked in a number of facilities and mental health units, and you probably get similar things, kind of correspondence and letters. And I used to, back in Indiana, I worked, my office was just a cell. They took the toilet out and put a desk in. And at night, the inmates would like put letters under my door, and they'd just be waiting for me, stuff like that. Sometimes they'd put turds there, and you just got to deal with that. Here's one of the letters I got. It's sent to me, but the letter says, Dear U.S. Human Rights Network, this is a red flagged letter from an Interpol agent and U.S. Air Force general, the real General Schwarzkopf. I'm having trouble getting out of prison, as was promised in a 2009 cell phone conversation with the Pentagon, then Congressman Obama, then President Bush, the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, the Supreme Court, International Criminal Court of Justice, the Israeli Knesset, and Dragonfly drones in Canada. I was told in 2009 by cell phone I would be released from prison on June 26, 2014, when U.S. oil production was up to speed and dependence on foreign oil was reduced. As self-evident, that date is come and gone. So before I die, I'm going to elaborate on all that has happened to me physically at the behest of China and the Illuminati, and a bunch of names. Okay, let's stop there. A person on the street would read this and say, that guy's crazy, right? Meaning that praecox feeling. Whoa, what's going on? This guy spent the last 10 years in prison. And he's got this wild story. So the content is delusional, right? We see delusional content, but use your mental status terms. Let's take a look at the organization. Hey, I was told I'd get out. I had these cell phone conversations. I'm essentially a secret agent. The date came and went. I never got out of prison. And now I'm going to write my memoirs. Here's what I would say. I'll tell you it's organized. It's very organized. You know why? That would make kind of a cool secret agent movie. You could make a movie out of that plot because it's kind of cool, right? What that means is you don't find yourself straining. Now, you may be befuddled and you may be kind of amazed at like, whoa, he wrote that, but you're not straining to find the meaning because it's organized. Content, delusional. Process, quite organized. Now, let's compare that. So jumped poison into my brain and call me the N-word. Their N-word jumped her bodies into me along with notorious members of the Gangster Disciples. That's a Chicago gang. They together have placed false implanted data in my memory bank to win an argument that can have them iced for stabbing me, poisoning me, and robbing me. They threw Larry Hoover and others such as Jeff Fort. Those are not inmates I worked with. Those are like famous originators of some of the Chicago area gangs, into me and others to protect them while they stopped my food intake with brown recluse spiders as they've always done. They threatened to steal my body, money, life, and liberty. I'm innocent of this crime because the IGs used to sleepwalk me while my dog was viced with jumpers, and they eventually tortured him to turn him against me. Okay, let's stop there. Do you see that we have strange content, right? Probably delusional. But do you notice the difference in level of organization? Do you feel yourself beginning to strain to make sense of this? So jumped poison into my brain. Right away, I'm leaning in and I'm squinting like, how do those words even fit together? Compare that to what we just read. I'm having trouble getting out of prison, as was promised in a 2009 cell phone conversation. Both examples of delusional content, but very different levels of organization. The first letter is quite organized. This one is far less organized. You find yourself straining. Now, how about this one? Recently, I have given no knowledge bearing the misplacement of my actions, considering strong emotions, depicting any sense of persons around me for feelings existing that is weighty of what is governed to them. Though it may seem as a practice, my meaning is a virtue consisting conditions of regard that tend no respect of those in nature before what I lie on, in truth, to what makes my surroundings a loss of its entirety to resort to in cause for what tiding offers. Now, is this one delusional? I'll be honest, I have no idea. I cannot make heads or tails of this. You can't even comment on the content because there essentially is no content. This is so disorganized that we are into what the DSM would call word salad territory here. There is simply no organization. There's no meaning to the degree that you can't even assess what the content is. So here we have 3 letters in a row. And I hope what this illustrates is the different levels of organization. And one thing I want to highlight is this guy, who I knew quite well, I can go talk to him and say, hey, I can tell you got this bad situation. I'm not going to say whether I think it's true or not, but like, hey man, are you going to hurt somebody if you don't get out of prison? And I expect this is a person who's capable of at least having a conversation with me, of saying, oh no, F them, Campbell. If they don't believe me, they're screwed. Or yeah, I'm going to take them out, because he's organized. His beliefs are delusional, and that may be a cause for concern, but his organization level means we can have a meaningful conversation. We don't have to be scared off by the crazy praecox feeling, right? So let's pause there. What I'm trying to do is illustrate that those terms in the DSM that give us our diagnostic criteria are really very useful at describing what we see. The guy who says, if they send me to unit XYZ is going to result in me hurting people, we can say, there may be hallucinations. I don't know, but he's not delusional. He's not disorganized. His speech is not disorganized, and there's no negative symptoms. There's no decrease in functionality, unless of course there is. So we're building a case in our documentation that this is not somebody who needs to be placed in a mental health unit or something like that, because we don't have an episode of psychosis. Now, he may be a difficult person. He may be a problematic person, but what we're seeing is the building blocks that says this is a person who's a personality disorder, not a psychotic disorder, even though he's claiming to hear voices. Use your fancy diagnostic language to describe this one. I need help with medical words. I have knowledge of what medical vocabulary are used. I need request of book vocabulary. If medical vocabulary label, then the answer would be medical vocabulary. If different as Republican medical book or on Democrat medical book, are you able to answer vocabulary? Now here's one that's clearly poorly disorganized. It's hard to make sense of it, but really, I kind of know what he means. He's looking for some help with some words, right? It gets kind of weird here, but do you see how you can get the meaning from it? It's disorganized, but it's not so disorganized that I can't go have a conversation with this person. So again, we see not overt delusion. We don't see any sense of hallucination, but we just see that it's kind of disorganized, but it's not so disorganized we can't make sense of it. Compare it to this one, Dear Man. Now, if you know anything about DBT, you know that a Dear Man is an abbreviation for how to kind of ask for something in an appropriately assertive way. And we used to tell people, write a Dear Man. And they always thought that meant write a letter addressed Dear Man. So I don't know, that's life. He says, he wrote this to a psych tech, she was a young, attractive woman. He writes this letter, I'm not going to write you or the treatment team because you all will think that I like you and that I want something. So if I lie, I'll be subject to disciplinary action for writing fiction when my journaling I require paper for is actually nonfiction. I'm trying to sell to staff for $5 a page because my works are most famous and people collect my works. You can have this one for a price and start your own collective works of inmate so-and-so. Wow. And what I like about this one is if you deal with psychotic people, patients who have psychosis, what I often find is when you sit down and talk to them, they can hold it together for a few minutes. And the more they talk, the more it starts to spin out of control, right? And in this letter, you can almost feel that organization crumbling in just a few, 15 lines. He starts off, I'm not going to write because they'll think I like you. Now, that's actually not a terribly organized thing, because when inmates are writing to a young, attractive woman, that's not an unreasonable thing for them to feel concern about. And then he says, really what he's doing, he's asking for paper for his journal. Can I have some paper for my journal? But it's not fiction, it's nonfiction, and it's really famous. And you might want to buy this, and you could get it, start a collection. You can feel it crumbling, and you can feel a sense if he kept talking, the organization would fall apart. Again, is it delusional? Hard to say. Probably, maybe kind of, but it's not clear. What is clear is not the content is the problem. You can see the process start to fall apart. That's a sign that you're really dealing with psychosis. The federal agents are responsible for the voice of Balthazar Allen in your head. That was not this inmate's name. That was kind of an alter ego. Balthazar Allen is also HARP program, Psychic Wars with Russia. There are a group of elite criminals that have been training inmates in prisons and mental institutions to psychically attack other people and subject them to soul possession. Please type these exact words into Google search engine. HARP program, Psychic Wars with Russia. Okay, is that delusional? It's weird, isn't it? But let's take a look. Let's Google it. Oh my gosh, there's hundreds and hundreds of websites about the HARP program, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. It's all over the place. Gang, we live in a world that's full of all kinds of odd conspiracy theories these days. So what I like about this one is that starts by saying the voices in your head are Balthazar Allen. Now, to me, that's a lack of insight, because he's probably hearing voices in his head. He really is, but he's not telling you I hear voices because he doesn't have insight, right? What he's telling you is, I think we all hear the same voice, and I'm explaining to you who that voice you hear is. Now, to me, I have to make some diagnostic inferences, but what I'm taking from that is this guy thinks not only that he hears those voices, but that I also hear the voices. That to me says he's probably really hallucinating, and he probably really has no insight. But then he goes on to have this HARP thing, and now we're kind of into like conspiracy theory territory. Is that delusional? I'm just going to say, I don't know, but be careful. Just because somebody has weird belief doesn't mean they're having a psychotic episode. This is an example of somebody who's showing some psychosis, but also showing some signs of belief that may or may not be. It just illustrates you got to be careful. Again, a drawing I got, I have no idea what to make of this. True Electricity, Baghdad, Deed Plumbergram, Scraps Journey. It's kind of a body, just not organized. You can't make sense of it without, you're straining, there's nothing there. This one was written by a guy who I had diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he was mad at me for that. He didn't like that, and he wrote me this letter, which was one of 8 pages of all the same thing to prove that he was not mentally ill. A little quote, guess what, Campbell? Inmates talk about sex, drugs, and they mouth COs. I do not. My perfect good conduct proves my true faith in God you claim is not there. Quote, you see things that are not there, unquote. I doubt I ever said that. Inmates also have not been in positive correspondence with the governor of Arkansas and others in high places, which I can and will prove on the exact same that you have now wrongfully and illegally used against me. Inmates also do not have a CIA news brief tape. I will give you a chance to correct your honest mistake, but after that, it will no longer be an honest mistake. Now, here's what I want to illustrate about that. If somebody told you that they were concerned you had a mental illness, would you write an 8-page letter like this in this tiny, painfully small font, citing all these CIA news briefs and governor of Arkansas correspondence? It's very unlikely. So to me, this is almost like a visual representation of perseverative speech. Like you can't stop, you can't stop, you can't stop. But it's also an illustration of poor judgment. This is not a good way to show somebody you're not mentally ill. This is a way that makes someone think they really are mentally ill. And so what I wanted to show this slide is to illustrate the concept of impaired judgment. Now let's look at another one. Hello, Campbell. This is offender so-and-so, and I'm really tired of being an IRT. That was the mental health unit. I'm tired of all this stuff. I'm losing hope. I really am. It's days where I'd be feeling like giving up. I'm just fed up. Now, what I'm about to say, I'm not trying to blackmail or make a threat. Right? You know that, don't you? I'm not making a threat. Okay, here it comes. Me being locked up is taking a toll on me. I'm just tired of trying to do the right thing. Every time I try, I fail at it, only because of my past history. And it makes a lot of people here that work here dislike me. So that's why they find it in their power to mess with me. I'm not trying to play the blame game, because at the end of the day, I put myself in this situation only because of my poor decision making. Now, with all that said, if I'm not out of IRT in 2 weeks, I'm really going to kill myself. Now let's stop there. This is a guy who someone somewhere had diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. Is it possible that something bad is going to happen if I leave him in my mental health unit? Absolutely. Because what do we see here? We see that going back and forth of it's my fault, it's their fault, I'm saying what you want me to say, I actually blame everybody else. This is all indicative of antisocial personality disorder. But you've got to be careful, because someone like this is perfectly capable of hurting himself or others, if no other reason, just to make a point. And when they carry that diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder, even if it was put on there 5 years ago, your judgment will most definitely be called into question if something bad happens, and you better be able to document why you did what you did. Have you been in that situation before? I bet a lot of you have. I just love this one. To all DOC employees, please be advised your predator stigma class does not define the behavior I've displayed over the duration of my incarceration. I am a coochie crook, a man who possesses the caliber of intellect that can captivate any woman and manipulate her out of her coochie. Once it is surrendered, she will feel as though it was the most gratifying decision she's ever made in her entire life. Sincerely, the coochie crook. All right, I think that's humorous, but let's take a look at it from a diagnostic lens. Do we see the signs of psychosis? Do we see odd beliefs? Do we see grandiosity? Do we see possible delusion? Maybe that erotomania, whatever the term is a specifier for psychosis? Yeah, possibly. You can't rule it out, even though it's kind of belligerent and aggressive. Now, if we look at the ASPD terminology, diagnostic criteria, we talk about an inflated and arrogant self-appraisal, self-assured, cocky, glib, with superficial charm. So here we got a situation that to me looks like clear ASPD, antisocial personality disorder. But remember, when you're dealing with attorneys and possible bad outcomes and people getting hurt, you need to have that other set of mind that says, could it be psychosis? Is there reason to believe it might be? And there is. That doesn't mean you got to diagnose it, but it means you better be clear and thorough in your documentation, whatever you're going to do. This is a drawing that was presented to me. I put a guy, I was on the committee that put him on involuntary medications because he was really, bad off with schizophrenia. And on the way out, he says, wait a minute. I just realized what's going on here. You think I have schizophrenia? And I said, yeah, that's what we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes. Regrettably, yeah, I think you have schizophrenia. He says, what if I tell you I have a blueprint of a hover car that won't be invented for 100 years? And then he goes out in the hall, draws this, and slaps it on my desk, kind of like a drop the mic moment, right? Like, see, I'm not mentally ill. Once again, we make some diagnostic inferences and we say, not only is this a kind of a weird delusional belief, but this is bad judgment. He doesn't know how to communicate that he's not mentally ill. Why? Because he's mentally ill. Now, I just got to add, when this guy walked out the door, he knew he wasn't getting anywhere. He was going to go have to take the shot. And he turned around, he looked at me and he said, you are a punk ass Abraham Lincoln looking motherfucker. And I was like, you know what? That was pretty good. That was pretty good. And the correctional officer's like, you want me to go get him? I'm like, no. That was pretty good insight right there. Yeah. So my staff kept putting pictures of Abraham Lincoln up all around my office for the next few days. Sorry about the F-bomb again. We're getting to the end here. I've got 5:52 Idaho time, so just a few more minutes. Here's a letter. Hi, As a very young child, around 2 or 3 years old, I already knew of Jesus and Satan. I prophesied to my mother that Satan was going to get me. It scared her because I haven't been exposed to the words Satan or Jesus. I used to talk to Jesus. He came out of my closet and appeared to me. I can't really recall any feelings of my past. Dr. Campbell makes me remember things. I feel relieved after we talk. I'm still not sure if I'm the only living creature beside God. I'm not sure what is going on. I feel stupid, empty, void of valor. Now that's interesting. And someone in the community might say, wow, that looks crazy. But if we take a little closer look at it diagnostically, what do we see? First of all, we see that flattened affect. I can't recall feeling. I feel empty. I feel void. That's that negative symptomology, right? He talks about this thing about Jesus coming out of the closet. Okay. But then he says this comment, I'm not sure if I'm the only living creature beside God. And I kind of grab onto that because to me, that is what I would refer to as kind of partial insight. I might be the only living being in the universe, or maybe I'm not, I can't tell. To me, that's a sign that he's not really engaged with full insight, but he's got some insight. He's kind of wrestling with what is real or what is not. If you want to fancy up your documentation, you can refer to that as attenuated insight. Attenuated is a fancy way of saying kinda. He's kind of got insight, but kind of not. This is my last one. Dear Walter, this was a Christmas card. As you encourage me and you really care for me, I'm extremely grateful for you and you are a blessing to me. So now I encourage you to be the best you can be and follow your heart. You're a great person and I will really miss you when either of us makes an exit. You've been great to me. I'm really thankful for your support. And it goes on and on and on for pages. Now, this is the kind of thing, if you've worked in mental health units, you may be familiar with, but I like to close with it because this is the kind of thing that in my experience, watch out. This is that classic borderline personality. Do you notice how overly familiar it is? He calls me Walter instead of Dr. Campbell. He just kind of lavishes his praise on me. And I've seen early career clinicians and psychologists be so flattered and so touched by correspondence like this that they're like, this is great, I'm making progress. But I'm just going to tell you from my personal experience, part of the borderline personality disorder criteria is that alternation between like adoration and demonization. And as soon as you got this is nice, but watch out because part 2 is coming and you're going to be on the butt end of the whole other side. All right, concluding, what I tried to focus on was helping you and your staff be able to identify the difference, not only with the thought content, but with the thought process, especially in regard to organization. The importance of judgment and insight for differentiating someone who's impaired by psychosis and someone who's representing antisocial attitudes. The organization of their thoughts and how they connect to those behaviors. And lastly, for psychosis, we should see a decrease in that level of functional impairment. These are valuable tools that will really strengthen your documentation. And if you have to go to court and defend because something bad happened, these are very powerful tools to have in your documentation to pull out and say, I was making decisions based on effective DSM-based criteria. That will mean a lot to courts and really protect you when you think through defensive documentation. You got any questions? Here's it's not my digits, but it's my email. I would love to talk. I'm going to stop right there. And I will just ask Danielle or Ashley if we have any questions or anything we need to address here.
Dr. Campbell, that was so great. I learned so much from your talk. Thank you again for being here. I wanted to let you know that we got a lot of comments about people that were agreeing with you and your conceptualizations. But I didn't know if you could, I didn't want to interrupt to let you know that they were all saying that it makes sense and they were loving your presentation. But let's see, we do have a couple questions here. I know that you talked about possibly.
Do we want to just make an announcement about the CE links just in case people need to jump off? So we recognize that we have an error in the CEU link that it has objectives from a previous webinar. So I apologize for that. But what we can do, so we won't be able to put the updated link in the chat box within the next 3 minutes. We have to fix that. But we have everybody's email addresses of everyone who attended just through your registration. So we can email you both the slides from today, or edited slides from this evening, as well as the link. So I apologize, there'll be just a little bit of a delay in getting your CE link to you, but we will get that to you. So just wanted to let folks know before people trickle off.
Thank you, Ashley. And again, I apologize for that error. So hopefully we'll get that to you very soon. So Dr. Campbell, I know that you talked a lot about not making the diagnosis of malingering. So Lacey Levitt asked, what about adding a rule out diagnosis of malingering?
Okay, so as far as the malingering thing goes, I'm really I'm taking off my clinician hat and I'm putting on my guy who deals with lawyers hats all the time. As soon as, like, I'm not telling you don't, I'm just telling you, you open yourself up to legal challenges. If something goes bad, like take the guy who said, I'm sick of being here, I'm gonna take myself out. And he's got this diagnosis and I say, he's malingering, there's really nothing wrong. He's just manipulating. If something goes bad, now I've got to prove he was malingering instead of just pulling back and saying, I'm not seeing psychosis. Now it would be like up to his attorney to prove he really was. But once I put malingering on there, even if I just put rule out, I've got to prove that that was actively faking. And that's very difficult to prove. So I understand maybe wanting to get that on the chart, but I just think you're in corrections. It's so litigious. You're just in dangerous business, and I would recommend it against it personally.
Okay, yes, that makes sense. Also there was a question about tapping into, let's see, lack of insight regarding psychosis. Would that be the same if you specifically asked about it rather than having them report it spontaneously?
So I would say, again, in my experience, the only diagnostic criteria for any psychotic disorder that anyone has ever been able to communicate with me about are hallucinations. So I do find I've heard a lot of very compelling reports about hallucinations that I had to kind of dig for and ask for. There are other people who seem to be, we'll talk about that, attending to internal stimuli. When you meet, like, let's say somebody is maybe on suicide watch and I go up to their cell to see how they're doing that day, and they're hiding in a corner with little toilet paper men and they're kind of having a conversation. And when I say, hey, good morning, they almost start like, oh, what? To me, those are just different levels of convincingness. I can talk with someone about voices, and they may have very articulate, frightening stories about hearing voices that I find compelling, but I find even more compelling the person who seems to be trying to hide it from me, and I can tell the signs because they're attending to that internal stimuli. So it's very possible someone will talk to you articulately about the voices they hear. I just think that's probably a lower level of evidence for psychosis than the lack of insight person who's trying to hide those voices. And then if somebody is very superficial, I hear voices trying to tell me to hurt myself. Oh, really? What are the voices like? I don't know. Is it a man or a woman? Dude, is it inside your head or not? I don't know. Like when they're kind of like skipping over, that to me would be like the least compelling report.
Nicole Graham asked a really good question about if you had any recommendations for disaggregating sovereign citizen type beliefs versus delusional disorder. And
no, I don't. But honestly, but really, I mean, like, think about some of like in the news, the QAnon thing. Like, Hillary Clinton has slave children in tunnels, and she's eating their faces to get the adrenal, whatever that stuff is. Like, that's bizarre. But I don't think we'd say it's delusional. I don't know. And the sovereign citizen thing seems to me to fall into that same category. So here's what I would say. Sovereign citizen folks can be weird. I get it. For me personally, I would not diagnose a psychotic disorder unless I had some collateral supporting evidence. Again, that's where it's really important to look into the disorganization. If they're telling you, I'm not a citizen, I don't have to do stuff, that follows linearly. It might be wrong. It might even be delusional, but if it's organized, I'm going to refrain from the diagnosis of psychosis. I would need to see more signs of a psychotic disorder, even though I know that's pretty weird. Only because sometimes when you get into politics, people have very extreme views. We don't want to consider extreme views to be delusional.
Okay, we have a couple follow-ups just on the malingering. People are very interested in that. Would you recommend using measures such as like the TOM to maybe support that?
Yeah. First of all, I don't really bother to do those just because, frankly, I don't feel like I get anything out of it. I mean, if you're trying to get someone out of a mental health unit and you want to support it, that's probably a valid reason. And if you have supportive evidence-based, I don't honestly know offhand the TOM or some of those similar ones, like how evidence-based they are. Personally, I just find I don't get much out of that malingering diagnosis. I can usually get someone out of my mental health unit if they're extorting people without it. If you find you need some support and that malingering diagnosis gets you what you need, I get it. Just understand that from a legal perspective, as I understand it as a non-lawyer, you are opening yourself up to a lot of challenges that will be hard to defend. Now, the TOM is a good tool that supports it, but it doesn't prove it beyond the shadow of a doubt. It just supports it. So it's almost your level of risk tolerance, because a malingering thing does open you up to legal challenges.
And then do you suggest, let's see, Kathleen Gallagher asked about maybe talking about, rather than diagnosing or saying malingering, maybe just describing that someone approached an interview or testing in a guarded manner or some other manner that may suggest that there might be some issues with how they answered questions?
So generally, what I want to do in order to avoid that malingering diagnosis is, and that's why I wanted to entitle this differential diagnosis. What I want to do is steer away from the malingering diagnosis and steer towards something more like antisocial personality disorder. Because if I see a pattern of dishonesty and deceit and disregard for the rights of others, they may be malingering, but honestly, I don't feel like I get much from that. What I do get more traction on is diagnosing that personality disorder. Here we got, I mean, it's very common to get that cluster B person. Are they full on antisocial personality disorder? I don't know, but they're close. Are they borderline? I don't know, but they're close. Are they histrionic? Yeah, but I don't know if it's the full thing. Are they narcissistic? Yeah, but is it the full diagnosis? I don't know. So they live in that cluster B area and may not meet the criteria for any one of those. But for my money, I'm steering more towards, let me get a personality disorder diagnosis in the chart and in the conversation for that differential diagnosis piece. I don't like the malingering thing. I have never found it really got me much as far as working with the prison. And I find that lawyers are like, oh my God, you better really be able to defend yourself. And so, look, if you like it, I'm not telling you don't. I'm just saying for me, I ain't going to do it. And I recommend you don't either. I feel like it opens too many problems without giving you enough traction diagnostically. I like the ASPD much more.
Dr. Campbell, I'm sorry, I mischaracterized Miss Cynthia Wright's question. She wondered if you would recommend using some things like the TOM and other measures of malingering
Okay.
in terms of differentiating diagnoses, I guess.
I feel like I should, I don't know. I don't use them myself. I have had clinicians who came to me and said, I want to use the TOM to make a case, and I'll sign off on that and review it. I don't feel like I know enough to say that. Here's the other thing. In prison, people have all their power taken away, and they will often manipulate as an adaptive behavior. We don't like it, and it's antisocial, but if an asshole like me was in prison, I'd be doing the same thing. And I don't think it's because I have a characterological flaw. I mean, I have plenty of flaws, but I don't think that's it. So I almost feel like in a prison environment, how you differentiate adaptive dishonesty from malingering, to me, I don't like it. If you did it, I would support it, and I would even be happy to consult with you about how you worded it. But for me, I just don't like it. And I've had plenty of attorneys support me in that. So take that for what it's worth. we don't want to base everything we do on what attorneys say, God knows, but we do get good consultation from them. And I'll just tell you, I've had a lot of attorneys support me in saying that.
I'll stop you before you make a lawyer joke. Just FYI, I'm a lawyer.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Well, we love our lawyer friends, but I mean, honestly, I do want to say, so if you're in prison work, you may interact with your team of attorneys. And here's the thing, they are, again, Danielle, call me, if I'm wrong, call me out, but like, they are there to consult. They don't make clinical decisions, even though sometimes the line gets blurry. But like, I want the lawyers to weigh in. I want to hear what they have to say, but that is a legal consultation. It's not a diagnostic decision. Danielle, would you agree with me, or you think I'm off base there?
Well, I mean, just as my clinical hat, I do more forensic evaluations, like pretrial evaluations. So I see like Nicole Graham talked about like using some of these measures in competency evaluation.
Oh, okay.
Like that. And,
So-
and I do use those occasionally.
You know,
on those.
okay, that's a really good point, because I'm not, I'm a counseling psychologist by training, which means I'm like hugging and loving, and I've somehow gotten the wrong field. Forensic psychology is a well-established field. It's not my area. I don't know. I can't speak to it. The reason I don't really go for those things in this presentation is I'm really trying to focus on that moment when you walk to SAG and someone's telling you something and you got 2 minutes to make a decision. Now, if you've got the time to sit down and make a more detailed analysis, those can be good tools. I personally don't have a lot of expertise in them, so I don't want to discourage you from using them, but I just kind of feel like I shouldn't speak to them because it's not my thing. But often we're in situations where we have to make quick decisions. Sorry, my sister. So that's why I kind of steer away from it. If you're in the world of forensic psychology, you probably know a whole lot more than I do, and just like disregard what I'm saying because you're a lot smarter than me. I'll tell you that much.
No, Dr. Campbell, I just want to, I know we're losing some folks because it's a little bit after time.
Yes, we've gone over time.
Thank you so much to all the participants that stood, that just stayed with us throughout these extra questions and everything. But for the most part, Dr. Campbell, the comments were that everyone really appreciated your presentation, and thank you so much for sharing all this information with us. And we hope to get your slides. Bruce Borkowski, I think you could see, said so interesting, and that basically sums up what other folks have been saying. So incredible, thank you, says Rebecca, and great presentation. I see that you might be able to see these very informative and engaging.
So listen, let me just say this. I view us as a weird little dysfunctional family. And so if you want to reach out and talk further, I would always be more than happy to. I'll be speaking at NCCHC next week. If you ever want to reach out, please don't hesitate, because we all face totally unwinnable, bizarre situations all the time, and we can support each other. So keep my email handy. If you ever want to reach out, the door's open. I'd love to talk to you. Thank you,
Dr. Campbell. And as you can see, we did link up the correct CE link to tonight, but we in the box, but we'll send it out as well, just in case for those people that may have missed it. Sorry again for the mistake. Thank you everybody for attending. We'll have another webinar in May that we hope you can join us for. Thank you, Dr. Campbell.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks, Wally. It was really interesting. A lot of great comments.
All right. Thank you, guys. Hope to interact with you again down the road sometime.
Yes.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.